We have one more talk for the morning session, and that's going to be about Jewel Cave. And Dan Austin is going to tell us about what's going on at Jewel.
Good morning, everyone. How's everybody enjoying convention so far?
Way!
All right.
Did you hug Chris?
I might have. So I hate to start this talk off on a bit of a somber note. I do have some upsetting news to share with everybody. If you haven't heard already, on Saturday, this past Saturday, Dwight Deal passed away. And Dwight was one of the people who was instrumental in basically garnering interest with Herb and Jan Kahn in the Jewel Cave project. So all of what you're about to see is largely because of his curiosity about what was around the next corner in Jewel Cave. And it's a sad day for everybody because we have lost one of those great caving legends here. So, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been working on over the past few years in Jewel. And I want to go back to 2019 because in 2019 we had a bit of a pause on exploration due to a construction project happening along our scenic tour route, which is the tourist route, the main tourist route at the bottom of the elevator shaft. And that construction project, at the end of that construction project, was when COVID hit. And so between the scenic tour construction and COVID, we essentially had 2 years where no exploration was being conducted in the cave. So we kind of went off of 2018 on a bit of a high because we had just surveyed the 200th mile. That was December of 2018. So we were on this really big high. We had been doing a lot of exploration up to that point, and then it was essentially nothing for the next couple of years due to the construction COVID concerns. But we're kind of back at it now. The things are ramping back up again. We're starting to go back out on longer expeditions in the cave, and it's difficult because we can't just jump right back into it. This is one of those caves that takes a lot of conditioning your body to get to the type of shape that you need to be in to go out to the end of the cave. So, I don't know if this pointer will work here, maybe not. Essentially, I want to point out everything on the left side of the map right there. This is the whole cave system. On the left side, most of that has been explored since 2014, and I'll go into a little bit more depth in that on that side in just a minute. And in the right side, the southeast part of the cave, we haven't done much in that area recently. So I'll do a little bit, I'll show you a little bit of some of the stuff that we found, kind of, I wish I had a laser plan. Just below where it says elevator entrance up there, there's kind of a thing that sticks out of the park boundary. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then some of the stuff on the left side of the map too. So I'm gonna focus on 3 areas. So I'll focus on 3 specific areas that we've done recent exploration here. I do want to point out on the map, the yellow dots are the campsites that we've established. On the left side, the northernmost yellow dot is West Camp, and we established that in 2014. The middle one is Deep Camp, that was 2016. And the one on the far bottom there is Hell Canyon Camp, and that was in 2019. The one on the far right is Southeast Camp. About 56% of the cave is outside of the park boundaries. So the green line is the monument boundary. Oh, and one more quick thing. There are only 2 entrances, the historic entrance and the elevator entrance. And all exploration that is currently taking place in the cave goes into and out of the cave through the elevator entrance. So I want to focus on the far right here, an area called Valley of the Kings, which was first discovered shortly before we had our first kind of major shutdown in 2019. And this was a breakthrough that happened. We weren't really expecting this. There were some mock-up surveys going on in this part of the cave, and Kelly Mathis became interested in this particular area. It was far enough away from the elevator to kind of get people involved with the cave on some harder trips. And he happened to find a pretty small hole on one of his survey expeditions that led to this big extension, which ended up going out through the monument boundary to the east there. So right in this area right here was the breakthrough into Valley of the Kings through a hole called It's a Trap. And it led to quite a bit of interesting passage. I think there's maybe 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles of cave out there now. And I just want to zoom in really quick and show you some of the ceiling heights. It's kind of tough for me to see, but 105, I think that's 80. So this is all really big passage through here. So they were pretty excited to squeeze through a teeny tiny little hole and find gigantic walking passage going off the edge of the map, which is, I wouldn't say frequently happens in Jewel, but it happens. So they were pretty excited. It's a trap. It is a very, very small hole to get into and out of. It's I think maybe like 15 feet long or so, and it's a body tube covered with spar. That's James Parr, one of our newer cavers, and Kelly Mathis, making it look very easy. And of course, on the other side of It's a Trap, it opens up into this gigantic passage. This is 3 feet tall. Looks a lot bigger. It does actually get a lot bigger than that further on, but you know, you can imagine squeezing through something like that. You get into a 3 foot tall passage. It's pretty exciting, especially when it's going off the edge. On the other side, some interesting formations. I'm not quite sure what these are, but the ring around the edge here is flat, and in the center is three-dimensional. These are pretty prominent along the travel route out to that new area, and you can have a disto there for scale. Lots of gypsum crusts, gypsum flowers in abundance. Jewel Cave has a lot of the gypsum formations. And this is James Parr sitting next to a crystalline, it's either a stalagmite or a column, I can't remember which, but it's very tall and you kind of have to squeeze around the edge to continue on down the passage. These are shards, what we call shards, or crinkle blisters for most of you out there, which are also pretty prevalent in this particular area. So again, I said they found some pretty large passage. This is some of the big stuff that was discovered in the Valley of the Kings. And that wall in the distance there is composed entirely of popcorn, which is pretty cool. And just a close-up of that popcorn wall. And then the end of the passage. And there are leads that remain in Valley of the Kings. We've had several trips go back. There will probably be more in the future. I think the most recent trip, though, kind of got skunked a little bit. They only ended up surveying like 300 or 400 feet. But there's still stuff to be found out there. It just takes a little bit to get out there. And, you know, through the tight stuff, we're kind of limited to the size of people that we can bring with us. Okay, back to the map again, and I'm going to focus now on the western branch of the cave. And in an area that we call the VAC section, V-A-C-C, which stands for Victory After Continuous Contortions. One of my favorite parts of the cave. So most of this area was explored and surveyed by Mike Wiles and crew in the 1980s, 1990s, and that is most of this stuff right here. However, all the way out over here is an extension that has been kind of added on. It's really hard for me to see at this angle, but an extension that's been added on recently, and I'll talk about that in a second. I want to first focus in on the northern part of this VAC section. Kelly Mathis recently led a 3-day exploration trip out to West Camp, and we had a pretty productive 3 days in the cave. I think we ended up surveying over 4,000 feet in the 3 days. And just to kind of zoom in and show you some of the areas, filling in the gaps, this is a lot of mop-up survey close to camp. You can tell where things have been added in and more detail has been filled in. Just as kind of something that was easier to get to close to camp. In the lower levels beneath this is Discovery Room 9999, In the lower levels beneath this are some fantastic gypsum flowers, some of the most intricate gypsum flowers that I've ever seen in my life. Gypsum in the cave isn't all that unusual. It's when you have the gypsum that kind of peels off of the main branches. That is pretty unusual in Jewel. And for some reason, the western branch of the cave seems to have an abundance of that gypsum. And just for scale, this is kind of hard to tell. There's Adam, so you can see how big these things are. So pretty impressive gypsum flowers. I just wanted to throw this in here. It's a pretty cool thing to see in the cave. So I just wanted to throw this in here to show you all some of the cool things we find on exploration trips. Okay, now focusing on the very western edge of the cave, the western edge of the vac section. All the way up here, kind of hard for me to see again, is a place called the burr hole. And the burr hole is a section of cave that basically takes about 45 minutes to an hour to travel 500 feet. It's very crawly, very tight. It's pretty miserable, but there's a lot of airflow through the burr hole. And so it's really drawn cavers to go investigate over the years. But each team has subsequently come back with, oh, that was terrible. Do we really want to do that again? But the lure of that air, the strong air in the cave, keeps us going back for more and more. So the burr hole itself is one pinch point, kind of up in this area, and the cave around it is just miserable. So there's only been a few trips beyond the burr hole total in all of history, all of the exploration history of Jewel. And during Kelly's trip, the 3-day trip recently, we went back through the burr hole and went into an area where Kelly became confused several years ago and missed our out time in the cave. And so there was a bit of a concern on the park's part for people coming out of the cave late, but Kelly was never able to really identify where he had gotten confused at in the cave. And subsequent trips had never really found that point either. And then finally on this most recent trip, we squeezed through this little hole right here and then found this segment of cave that kind of stretches out. And that was where Kelly had been on that trip several years back. So that finally is added to the map now. They squeezed through a little hole called the Adam Smasher because Adam Weaver couldn't quite make it through. And if Adam can't make it through, then there's no way I'm making it through. So Adam and me and another, I can't remember who else was with us on that trip, ended up surveying this extension up here while those guys were in this big stuff down here. We called this the Eastern Grr hole because it was just miserable, tight stuff with stuff falling off the ceiling down the backs of our necks, but still very, very pretty, like most of Jewel Cave is. So, all right, back to the map again, and I'm going to focus on this area down here. So all of this area was added in 2014 and after. This is the splinter section. We've only had 2 camp trips in the splinter section since September of 2019. So the first camp trip was done, not this most recent April, but the April before. That was Nick Anderson, myself, and Adam Weaver. We base ourselves out of Deep Camp, which is right here. And we travel from Deep Camp all the way up this direction, back down, and out into this area right here. This area right here. Essentially, we did a 3-day trip with Nick, Adam, and myself, and one of the days was dedicated to collecting water samples for park management. So we only really had a day to survey, and we ended up surveying, I think it was between 3,000 and 4,000 feet of virgin passage on that trip. We got really excited. Lots of big passages with leads going all over the place that we were anxious to get back to, but it wasn't until this most recent April that we were able to coordinate a trip to go back there. Again, we're based out of Deep Camp, which is about a 7-hour trip from the elevator entrance. So it's a ways out there. These are very remote camps. Try to make them as comfortable as we can. Deep Camp is probably the most comfortable camp in the cave, in my opinion. Very it's kind of nice laying in your sleeping bag, looking up at the ceiling, and you see all the boxwork, crystal-coated boxwork in the ceiling, and it's just a really comfortable place to be. This is our camp kitchen. Participants on the most recent trip, Renee Ohms, which most of you know. There's Kelly Mathis, myself, Nick Saki was there, and Adam Weaver. And this is just some of the pictures of some of the passages that we were surveying in. So not huge passages by any means, but still pretty sizable. A lot of it was walking passage. Very tall fissures in the splinter section. Some of them are 6 feet wide and 20 feet tall. That's kind of like the average out there. Sometimes it pinches down into crawlways, but still, a lot of this is just virgin passage that's just never been mapped because there's so much of it out there. And going off into the distance, we named this new area Moon Junction. Some formations that we found along the way, some gypsum needles, and gypsum flowers. And this cool thing, I'm not quite sure what the surrounding matrix is here, but these are brachiopods that are in the center of that matrix. And that's actually, for scale, that is that little thing stuck up in the ceiling there. So this is Nick Saki and some of the virgin passage that we were surveying with some really impressive aragonite. And you can tell that we're very close to the water table here. There's a lot of mud, and the aragonite is mud coated. So it's very, very intricate, very pretty stuff, but also very close to the water table, so there's definitely a lot of evidence of fluctuating water. We did find a new lake on our, not this most recent trip, but the trip before that. We called it Lake Inferior. And Lake Inferior is one of the deeper lakes in the cave that I've seen. It's probably between 40 and 50 feet deep. Very deep blue water, and unfortunately almost impossible to take a picture of, so I don't have one. Okay, I want to go through just a couple of quick statistics. The splinter section was first found in 2014 in that western branch of the cave. We've surveyed 32 miles, just a little over 32 miles since 2014 in the splinter section. And then between October of 2019 and present, we've added 4.08 miles to the total length of the cave. And these are a couple of our newer volunteers that we have had getting involved with the exploration recently in the cave. So still going strong. Again, we're picking back up again with exploration after the couple of years of shutdown. Okay. So current cave length, as it stands, is 212.58 miles, and since 2014 we have added 43.5 miles to the cave length, and obviously the vast majority of that's been in the splinter section. So this is a little bit of an older slide, but you can tell all of this yellow stuff here has been since 2014. So that's kind of what's been driving us over the last few years, is all of this big stuff going gangbusters out west. So it's been pretty exciting for us. A couple of quick things here. We are in the Black Hills, and I wanted to draw attention to Wind Cave, which is also one of our world's longest caves right here in the Black Hills area. 161.94 miles long, and Wind Cave, this entire block of cave, is contained within about 1 square mile of surface area. So 161 miles of cave in 1 square mile is like a gigantic ball of spaghetti. It is super dense, super, super difficult to find your way around in. It's an awesome cave, so if you get a chance to go there, definitely go check it out. At the same scale, here's Jewel Cave. And I purposefully tilted Wind Cave so it would fit in the middle, just so you can kind of see how Jewel Cave wraps around. Both caves have a lot of passages to them. Both caves are super mazy. The distances that we have to travel in Jewel are just extremely, extremely far. So it's just size comparison so you can see how far we're going to reach the ends of the cave. Again, Deep Camp is down over in this area. It's about 7 hours from the elevator, which is right in there, to get down to Deep Camp. And then there's Lech for comparison, same scale.
Oh, nice.
Remember, Lech is also a very vertical cave too. So you're looking at a plan view of the cave, but vertical-wise, it extends much deeper than either Wind or Jewel does, so it looks like it has a much smaller footprint to it. If Mammoth Cave was up here on the screen, it would completely encircle all of those caves. So, and I wish I had that graphic, but I don't. So I do want to acknowledge all the volunteers who put in the hard work over the years to make this possible. And you know, there's been thousands and thousands of hours added to the cave and the cave length by volunteers. We couldn't have done it without you. It takes a team. And you might have noticed we're all a community here in the Black Hills. All the cavers know each other. We're a very small community. We take pride in the projects that we have here, and we're happy to continue exploring in Jewel Cave and adding more as the years go on. So we're excited to see it continue and see where the cave goes. And again, none of that would have been possible if it wasn't for pioneers like Dwight, who encouraged Herb and Jan to come out of the needles, out of the spires in their climbing, and go underground and see what was around the next corner. So with that, thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of convention. We do have time for questions if anybody has anything. I see somebody waving over there. So 56% of the cave is outside of the park boundaries. The park does have a cooperating agreement with the outside land management agencies to manage the cave because all of the entrances are within the park boundaries. Because the cave is so extensive, it sure would be nice to have another entrance out there somewhere. It would definitely ease the difficulty of getting out to the end of the cave for exploration. However, there's a lot of logistical hurdles to doing that. For one thing, it could potentially change the airflow in the cave. You know, you're talking about putting an entrance in where there's never been an entrance before, and who knows how that would affect the cave. There's also logistical hurdles with, you know, cooperation with who's going to manage that entrance, who's going to control access. There's a lot of things that you have to consider when you do something like that, and it's not something that can be taken lightly. So I will say that we have had discussions about it. I'm not going to say that that's going to happen anytime soon. It's just something that is definitely on our minds, but I wouldn't say that it's something that's in the very near future.
On the maps, what did all those different colors represent?
Okay, hang on, Donald, for just a minute. We had one up front here. What do the colors represent?
Yes.
I think the question was, what do the colors represent on the map? The yellow is the higher levels of the cave, and then the darker reds are the lower levels, and it's a gradient from high to low for the colors. This is the easiest way to depict it. So, Donald, go ahead.
Why do you think the cave does wrap around such a large blank in the middle? Is there any obvious barrier to having the cave fill that in?
So Donald's asking why the cave wraps around that large blank area in the middle of the map. It has to do with geology, and I would refer you to Mike Wiles to answer that more clearly, because I'm not really a geologist. I can give you what I think, but I would not be able to speak as clearly as Mike would about some of the geology related to that phenomenon. So.
In a similar vein, is there something obvious stopping the southeast branch along that line?
There are definite boundaries where the cave stops. The passages just stop, and they don't seem to want to cross those boundaries. Some of those boundaries could be faults. They could be folds. There's active geologic mapping happening, both on the surface and in the cave, to identify those boundaries where the cave stops. And again, I'm not much of a geologist, but what I can say is that there are places where the cave bumps up against those geologic boundaries, whatever they may be. There's air blowing through those boundaries. Sometimes it's a breakdown blockage or just a too tight passage that we can't get through. So we know that there's a cave on the other side. Cave continues, we just can't get through it. So some places that has happened where we have found that one way on, and that's where the big breakthroughs happen. We get 30 plus miles of new exploration on the other side. But yeah. Thank you all.
So that concludes the morning session.